Up guys, this is Bradley Abbott with Butter Spice and Why Don't You Have a Slice? Today guys is a very big podcast, huge. I am going to be talking about carbohydrates, proteins and fats because after careful deliberation and a lot of research I realized quickly that I could not talk about one without the other because this podcast is so big that I have had to split it into 4 parts. The first part, I'm going to be talking about research and the different types of research involved. Sounds boring, I know, but it has to be talked about first to get an understanding of where I'm going with this podcast. Because right now, this is myth busting control. A lot of guidelines that we follow, well, we've been pretty good at following them, I'd say. But what if I told you that the guidelines are actually based on weak evidence? What would you say? You challenge my nutrition. You challenge my nutrition notion, right? I bet you would. I bet a lot of people out there would. The epidemiological studies are designed to generate hypotheses and not be seen as absolute results. They are weak observational studies based on weak science. An association in epidemiology can be considered cause and effect only if it meets certain criteria, the most important of which is the strength of the association. So, what is classed as a strong association? Well, one of the great success stories of the only great success story of epidemiology is that of smoking. So, smoking and lung cancer. Heavy smokers had a 15 to 30 times greater risk of dying than those who did not smoke at all. Compare this number to a 1.17, not a 1.7, a 1.17 relative risk for fresh meat and cancer, and a 1.18 relative risk for processed meat and cancer. Relative risks less than 2 are not reliable. This was stated by S. Chaparro in the Journal of Pharmacology and Drug Safety, and he stated this back in 2000, and he stated the following back in 2004. In adequately designed studies, we can be reasonably confident about relative risks. Sometimes we can only be guardedly confident about relative risk estimates of the order of 2.0. Occasionally, we can hardly ever be confident about estimates less than 2, and when estimates are much below 2, we are simply out of business. Epidemiologists have only primitive tools which for small relative risks are too crude to enable us to distinguish between bias, confounding, and causation. That's what was stated by S. Chaparro back in 2004. Now, don't get me wrong. All right, epidemiology is fine because it allows people to feel, and you observe the feelings and how it makes them feel. It's more, it's human. However, when it comes to blood work and when it comes to scientific physiological testing in terms of nutrition, they are unreliable in terms of that. They are reliable for creating hypothesis, but not very reliable in estimating a cause. Okay? That, and due to confounding and bias, the studies, confounding studies, have produced notions like this. Are you ready for this? They've produced notions like meat causes higher body fat percentage, meat causes higher BMI, it's related to lower education, and more cigarette smoking. This is the ridiculous type of information that we get. Now, by that logic, that means eating chicken is associated with us being stupid. Like, it's just absurd. Epidemiology relies on self-reported data, which is notoriously unreliable. Example? Food frequency questionnaires. Now let me state this. Food frequency questionnaires, they can be backdated, and it's very hard to backdate them. And what I mean by that is, you cannot ask someone what if they've remembered what they ate a week ago, a year ago. It's just unreliable. Okay? They're notoriously unreliable. Food frequency questionnaires, it's not. It's just, there's no point. Some spectacular failures on epidemiology have been the caps on dietary cholesterol, such as avoiding eggs and shellfish and etc., and the idea that fat causes cancer. These policies have been reversed since then. So, do you understand what I'm saying now, guys? You cannot. You just can't rely on this all of the time. Alright? There is something called the study pyramid that illustrates the weakest types of studies to the strongest in the context of what I'm talking about. Blood work and physiological tests to do with nutrition here. At the very bottom of this pyramid, you have expert opinions, quote unquote, because that's all they are, opinions. The next level, you have cross-sectional and case studies. The third level of the pyramid, there are uncontrolled longitudinal studies. Fourth level, controlled longitudinal studies. And right at the top, the alpha dog, there are the randomized control clinical trials. You are supposed to use the bottom levels to generate hypotheses in this context, and then use the top level modes like the randomized control trials to establish actual causation. This is Science 101, especially within this context of physiological testing. It's common sense. However, common sense and integrity seem, time and time again, to be trumped by personal agenda and one's own political views. Not fact, views. So, has there been any clinical control trials on meat and cancer? As a matter of fact, there has, many, but they often get overlooked because of our guidelines and agenda-driven boardsmen and doctors. I'll give you an example. The polyp prevention trial that was funded by the National Institutes of Health was specifically designed to look at colorectal cancer. What they did was they studied 2,079 people for 4 years with an 8-year follow-up period. They reduced both fresh and processed meat, and guess what the results were? Guess. They found no effect on the polyp prevention trial. No reduction. When they reduced the meat, no effect. Didn't make a difference. Did not make a difference. The relative risk was 0.9 to 1.12. Non-existent. Another National Institutes of Health study was the Women's Health Initiative. This was designed as a cancer trial, and they reduced red meat by 20% on 49,000 women who spent 8 years on this diet, and the results showed barely any change at all. So, what about red meat and death? Because this seems to be another notion that they seem to like generating. Okay? It seems to be another notion. Surely they have something that caused damage to us, right? Well, the NIH and the AARP cohort study looked at mortality from different causes associated with meat, heme iron, nitrates, and nitrites. This study found modest increases in mortality. But wait, there's more. What this study doesn't highlight for you is that it was generated on, once again, weak epidemiological studies. It is hypothesis mixed with personal agenda to push their views into scientific papers. Okay. Now, I'm going to mention another study here because I think this is important. After Nina Tajolts, who is a scientific journalist, and who has background degrees in biology, I think it's biology. Nina Tajolts went back and looked at Rashmi Sinha's paper. Now, I didn't know who this woman was either until I read about this, but you're going to find out now. And she saw that the groups of the study were split into five groups, or quintiles, as they were called. The lowest quintiles are for the lowest consumption of red meat, and the highest are for the highest consumption of red meat. Pretty straightforward to understand, right? Don't worry, I'm going somewhere with this. All right. So now this was done in a different study to the red meat and death study. Looking at the cause of mortality, there were 5,314 deaths in the lowest quintile and 3,752 deaths on the highest quintile. What? The higher the meat consumption, the lower the death rate? It was the opposite. Remember when I said the lowest quintiles for the lowest consumption of meat? And the highest is for the highest consumption of meat? Well, this study showed that the results were actually backwards. The highest consumption of meat were on the lowest quintile. The lowest consumption of meat was on the quintile. Was on the highest consumption of meat. The highest consumption of meat was on the lowest quintile. Vice versa. You get it. In conclusion of this actual paper, Rashmi Sinha has a bias and is wrapped up in her own political view, and she is a senior investigator and deputy branch chief of the National Institutes of Health and a member of the WHO panel. It's just complete and utter biased and an example of shattered integrity. There are many like her, like this, that are on the board of the National Institutes of Health. Okay? There are many like this who have the power to push their agenda because they're already on the board and they're already in charge of these projects. Isn't that scary? Scares the shit out of me sometimes. I don't understand why we allow this political nonsense to affect our nutritional guidelines or let it affect our own health, because it does affect our own health. We've listened to the guidelines for more than 50 years, and yet obesity has gotten worse. Cancer has gotten worse. Yes, we're better at dealing with stuff like that now, like obesity and cancer and diabetes, but just as many people still get it. They haven't prevented anything. They just know how to, they're just better equipped to treat it when it happens. Wouldn't it be better to be proactive? This kind of thing, guys, it just pisses me off. You cannot be biased like this and get away with stuff, but these guys and girls do, because of their political pull. The good news is, guys, I'll give you the good news and the bad news. Well, the bad news is that there are people on health and nutrition panels with members that are so wrapped up in their own political view that they are willing to push their own agendas, even if it goes against the science. This cover-up results. They cover up results, and even if the results are not what they expect, even if the results are not what they expected and wanted, they will not publish them. Like in the case with Ansel Keys' teams, and this is what they stated, they were so disappointed with their own results that they did not publish them until years later, 16 years later, I think. More and more weak science is being repeated and promoted and being driven by ideological activist agendas. This hasn't gone away. The good news, however, meat is good for you. Both red and white meat. So don't worry about this whole meat controversy. It's good for you and it's evolutionary, my dear Watson. So please, don't worry about red meat. It's good for you. It has absolutely a ton of nutrients in, like zinc, selenium, choline, other vitamins such as B2, B6, B5. For goodness sakes, get a grip. This is Bradley Abbott signing off, and I'll see you in the future for part 2 of this macro conundrum. Signing off with butter spice. Why don't you have a slice? Peace out.